Hello, my name is Lewis, and today we're looking at the $75 budget Toxrill the Corrosive deck tech. Toxrill says at the beginning of each end step, put a slime counter on each creature you don't control. Creatures you don't control get -1/-1 for each slime counter on them, and whenever a creature you don't control with a slime counter on it dies, create a 1/1 black slug creature token. Lastly, being able to sack a slug to draw a card. This deck is all about giving our opponents a token army, getting slime tokens on our opponent's creatures and proliferating the life out of those counters to wipe our opponent's board and overwhelm with our slug army to get the win. Now, let's get right into the budget deck tech. As always with our budget brews, we're starting off with all of that ramp. First on up is Flying Rampy Staple Ornithopter of Paradise to tap for a mana of any colour, and Dark Ritual to add 3 swamp to your mana pool. There's Commander Sphere to tap for a mana of any colour in your commander's colour identity, and Mind Stone to tap for colourless, with both of them having that secondary sacking option to draw a card. Taking that trip to Signet City now with Arcane Signet to tap and add a colour in your commander's colour identity, and Dimir Signet to pay, tap and add Dimir. We've got Dimir Keyrune to add Dimir or pay to make it a 2/2 unblockable horror artifact creature, and Dimir Locket to add Dimir or pay and sack to draw 2 cards. There's Black Market that adds a charge counter whenever a creature dies, and at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you add a swamp for each charge counter on Black Market. This is potentially huge with that big bad Toxrill that'll be getting all of those slime counters out and killing off your enemy's creatures. Potentially so much mana. And finally, we have Soul Ring, because Soul Ring. Before we get onto all of those opposition token makers, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for all things MTG. It's completely free to do, and it helps our channel grow and grow as we head towards 2,000 subscribers. Next on up, we're looking at all of those opposition creature creators and casual creature killers. First up is a Crow and Horse that says when it ETBs, an opponent gains control of it, and at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent creates a 1/1 white soldier creature token. And Hunted Phantasm, an unblockable spirit that when it comes into play, you put 5 1/1 goblin tokens on the field under an opponent's control. We want to be playing these cards to give our opponents some cheap fodder, because on each upkeep, Toxrill will be sliming all of our opponent's creatures, and the more creatures we can give out, the more we will gain from it. We've got Clackbridge Troll that when enters the battlefield, target opponent creates 3 0/1 white goat creature tokens, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, any opponent may sacrifice a creature. If a player does, you tap Clackbridge Troll, you gain 3 life and you draw a card. And Infernal Genesis, it says at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. They then put X 1/1 black minion creature tokens into play, where X is the card's converted mana cost. We've got Artifact Genesis Chamber that says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, if Genesis Chamber is untapped, that creature's controller creates a 1/1 colourless mirror artifact creature token. And moving on to some creature killers, we have Black Staple Massacre Worm that when ETBs, creatures your opponents control get -2/-2 until end of turn. And when those creatures that your opponents control dies, that player loses 2 life. For some more minus-loving creatures, we have Ascendant Evinkar, a flyer that says other black creatures get +1/+1 and non-black creatures get -1/-1. And Karvek the Spiteful that says other creatures get -1/-1. Of course, some of your opponent's creatures may be so big that yes, you may get that slime counter on it, but you might want some other ways just to make sure that that card kicks the bucket. On some more black removal classics, we've got Merciless Executioner that when ETBs, each player sacks a creature, and Plaguecrafter that again, when ETBs, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, with those who can't discarding a card. There's Fleshbag Marauder that when ETBs, each player sacrifices a creature, and Demon's Disciple that when ETBs, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. On to the last 3 cards in this section, we have Blood Artist that says whenever it or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And Falconwrath Noble, the flying vampire noble that says whenever it or another creature dies, again, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. The aim of the game is to constantly be wiping our opponent's board, so having cards like this will really help push our life total up, whilst also knocking down our opponent's life total. Finally, we have big wipe option Necrotic Hex that makes each player sacrifice 6 creatures, with you then creating 6 tapped 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. Now moving on to the next part in our key strategy, and that is all those cards that love to proliferate. First one up is Flux Channeler. This is whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Proliferate, and Deep Glow Skate, that when ETBs, double the number of each kind of counter on any number of target permanents. We have Flying Fairy Rogue Guildpact Informant. This is whenever it deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, Proliferate, and Thrumming Bird, that says again when it deals combat damage to a player, you proliferate. Now Proliferate is so key in a deck like this because Toxrill will be giving all of your opponent's creatures those -1/-1 counters, so we may as well proliferate them again and make them -1/-1s, -2s, which again could be the difference maker in getting rid of some of your opponent's bigger, badder creatures. Getting a bit more dirty now, we have Viral Drake, a flying 1/4 with Infect that we can pay 3 and a blue to proliferate, and Tezzeret's Gambit to draw you 2 cards and then proliferate. There is Contentious Plan for another card drawing proliferate option, and Steady Progress to yet again proliferate and draw a card. We've added in Fuel for the Cause, which counters target spell and then proliferates, and Spread the Sickness for some creature removal and then proliferating. For the final 2 cards in our proliferating party, we have Grim Affliction. This says put a -1/-1 counter on target creature, then proliferate. And Artifact Contagion Clamp, that when ETBs, you put a -1/-1 counter on target creature, which we can then pay for and tap to proliferate. As we've already said, the more we're proliferating those -1/-1 slime counters, the more chance we're removing those enemy creatures, and we're triggering off Toxrill to get more slugs, widen our board, use those slugs as card draw option, or just start creating a big board for the win. Now before we finish up with all of those lands, we're looking at the best of the rest in this Toxrill deck. First, let's focus on the removal with Feed the Swarm to destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls with you losing life equal to that permanent's mana value. And Go for the Throat to destroy target non-artifact creature. There's Hero's Downfall to destroy target creature or planeswalker, and Infernal Grasp to destroy target creature with you losing 2 life. Moving on to the counter spells, we're starting off with the most iconic with Counterspell, and Negate to counter target non-creature spell. We've got the always great Rewind to counter target spell, then untapping up to 4 lands, and Unwind to counter target non-creature spell, untapping up to 3 lands. We do want a few counter spells in this deck because as soon as Toxrill's out, it will become a target, so we want some ways to prevent our opponents from trying to take Toxrill away from our hands. To wind our opponents up even more, we've snuck in Gissa Glorious Resurrector, which says if a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. And at the beginning of your upkeep, put all creature cards exiled with Gissa onto the battlefield under your control, with them gaining Decayed. I have done a Gissa deck tech a few months ago, and it is just such a filthy card that it really will bring some hate towards your opponents. And of course we had to throw in Sludge Monster. This card says when it ETBs or attacks, put a slime counter on up to 1 other target creature. And non-horror creatures with slime counters on them lose all abilities and have power toughness 2/2. So with Toxrill already giving out those slime counters on every end step, this comboed with Sludge Monster will reduce all of your opponent's creatures to weak 2/2 fodder. Moving on to the card draw, we have Kel's Fight Fixer, a Menace Warlock. This is when you sacrifice a creature, you may pay an island or forest. If you do, draw a card. And you can pay 1 and sack a creature, and Kel's gains indestructible until end of turn. And Morbid Opportunist, the Human Rogue. This is whenever 1 or more other creatures die, draw a card, with this ability triggering only once each turn. We have some classic Commander Blue staples in Preordain to scry 2, then draw a card, and Brainstorm to draw 3 cards, then putting 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. There is Opt to scry 1 and draw a card, and Strionic Resonator to pay 2 and tap to copy target triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. Onto a load of reanimating cards, we have Feign Death. This is until end of turn, target creature gains whenever this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. And War of the Spark Classic, Kai's Ghost Form to enchant creature or planeswalker you control. And when enchanted permanent dies or is put into exile, return that card to the battlefield under your control. There is Supernatural Stamina. This says until end of turn, target creature gets +2/+0 and gains when this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. And Almost Carbon Copy, Undying Malice. This is until end of turn, target creature gains When this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. We are packing in plenty of these cards. As we've already said earlier, Toxrill will definitely become a target once it is out and killing all of your opponent's creatures. So if we pack in all of these cheap ways to bring it back, then we are laughing. And moving on to what I call the Elking cards, thanks to my good friend Occo, we have Mass Diminish that says until your next turn, creatures target player controls have base power and toughness 1/1, with that flashback option. And Polymorph's Jest that says until end of turn, each creature target player controls loses all abilities and becomes a blue frog with base power and toughness 1/1. There is Split Second Loving card, Sudden Spoiling, that says creatures target player controls become 0/2 and lose all abilities until end of turn. And moving on to the protection, we have classic Swiftfoot Boots that gives equipped creature hexproof and haste. And for our final two cards, we're looking at more protection again. First with Diplomatic Immunity that says enchanted creature can't be the target of spells or abilities, and Diplomatic Immunity can't be the target of spells or abilities. And 1-drop blue card, Robe of Mirrors, that says enchanted creature cannot be the target of spells or abilities. Yes, even more ways to make sure that good old Toxrill stays protected and stays on the board. You love to see it. As always, we are finishing up this budget brew with all of those lands. First on up here, we're looking at 15 Island and 15 Swamp. There is classic commander staple Command Tower to tap and add 1 mana of any colour in your commander's colour identity. And Khan's Bastion to add a colourless, but again, give us that extra proliferating option. We have even more commander classics in Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse to sack, search your library for a basic land, putting it onto the field tapped. And last but not least, we have classic Dimir Bounce Land, Dimir Aqueduct, and Temple of Deceit. The ETB's tapped, but you get to scry 1. Toxrill is such a cool new commander from Innistrad Crimson Vow, and rightfully one of the most popular commanders to come out of this set. I know I do say it every video, but this really could be a card that I do build myself. There we have it, that is the Toxrill the Corrosive $75 budget deck tech. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for all things MTG. Check out our link tree in the description below for all of our social media and affiliate links. For now though, I am all tapped out, so I'll see you in the next video.